Hi everyone, I'm going to go over the foreshadowing assignment you have for Of Mice and Men. So you have these passages and some questions to answer about them. So the first set of passages start out where Lenny and George are next to the river at the very beginning of the story. The text reads, "Go on, George. Tell about what we're going to have in the garden and about the rabbits and the cages and about the rain and the winter and the stove and how thick the cream is on the milk like you can hardly cut it. Tell about that, George. Why don't you do it yourself? You know all of it." "No, you tell it. It ain't the same if I tell it. Go on, George. How I get to tend the rabbits?" "Well," said George, "we'll have a big vegetable patch and a rabbit hutch and chickens. And when it rains in the winter, we'll just say the hell with going to work, and we'll build up a fire in the stove and set around in it and listening to the rain coming down on the roof. Nuts." He took out his pocket knife. "I ain't got time for no more." That's from chapter 1. And then later on, you have the conversation with Lenny talking to Crooks. "You're nuts." "We are too. You asked George." "You're nuts." Crooks was scornful. "I seen hundreds of men come by on the road and on the ranches with bindles on their backs and that same damn thing in their heads. Hundreds of them. They come and they quit and go on, and every damn one of 'em's got a little piece of land in his head. Never a goddamn one of 'em ever gets it." And that's from chapter 4. And then the next one is from chapter 5 after Curly's wife has been killed. Now Candy spoke his greatest fear. "You and me can get that little place, can't we, George? You and me can go there and live nice, can't we, George? Can't we?" Before George answered, Candy dropped his head and looked down at the hay. He knew. George said softly, "I think I knowed from the very first. I think I knowed we'd never do her." And that's from chapter 5. So these questions all relate to this dream and how the fact that the dream was never going to come true was foreshadowed early on. So in the first question asks, in the first excerpt, as he has done before, what does George describe to Lenny? So you just have to answer there, what is it that George is describing in that first scene? Number 2, at the end of the first excerpt, George breaks off suddenly, saying he ain't got time for no more. So why do you think George stops his description so abruptly? And I want you to think about, what might be going on in the back of George's head. I mean, he could be tired of telling it and having told it over and over again, but think that there might be a deeper reason for this. 3 relates to Crooks. Does Crooks think Lenny and George will get their own little piece of land? Explain his reason. That one's pretty straightforward. 4, in the final excerpt, what is it that George knowed from the very first? And again, this relates to the dream. And then the last question will ask you, how does Steinbeck use foreshadowing to hint that George and Lenny will not get their own farm? Find 2 examples. You need to get one from the first excerpt, the one when they're next to the river in the beginning, and another from the second excerpt. You've essentially answered this question already. You just have to kind of take together what you found out from answering the previous 4 questions and sort of compile it all together with evidence from the text, meaning direct quotes. So then you have another set of passages that start out relating to Candy's old dog. So Carlson is talking here. "Look, Candy, this old dog just suffers itself all the time. If you was to take him out and shoot him right in the back of the head," he leaned over and pointed, "right here, why, he'd never know what hit him." Candy looked about unhappily. "No," he said softly. "No, I couldn't do that. I had him too long." "You don't have no fun," Carlson insisted, "and he stinks to beat hell. Tell you what, I'll shoot him for you. Then it won't be you that does it." Candy threw his legs off his bunk. He scratched the white stubble whiskers on his cheek nervously. "I'm so used to him," he said softly. "I had him from a pup." "Well, you ain't being kind to him, keeping him alive," said Carlson. "Look, Slim's bitch got a litter right now. I bet Slim would give you one of them pups to raise up, wouldn't you, Slim?" The Skinner had been studying the old dog with his calm eyes. Yeah, he said. You can have a pup if you want to. He seemed to shake himself free for speech. Carl's right, Candy. That dog ain't no good to himself. I wish somebody'd shoot me if I got old and a cripple. Candy looked helplessly at him, for Slim's opinions were law. Maybe it'd hurt him, he suggested. I don't mind taking care of him. Carlson said, the way I'd shoot him, he wouldn't feel nothing. I'd put the gun right here, he pointed with his toe, right back of the head. He wouldn't even quiver. That's from chapter 3. Then the next section is later on in chapter 3 when Candy is talking to George and Lenny, and they've been talking about the little piece of land. And then Candy brings up his dog. He says, I ought to shot that dog myself, George. I should ought to have let no stranger shoot my dog. Again, that's later in chapter 3. And then this final section is from the last chapter of the book when George and Lenny meet up on the riverbank. And George has been repeating the story once again to Lenny. And George raised the gun and steadied it, and he brought the muzzle of it close to the back of Lenny's head. The hand shook violently, but his face set and his hand steadied. He pulled the trigger. The crash of the shot rolled up the hills and rolled down again. Lenny jarred and then settled slowly forward to the sand, and he lay without quivering. And that's from chapter 6. So, again, a series of questions. 1, why does Carlson offer to shoot Candy's dog? That one's really straightforward. 2, how does Carlson say he will shoot the dog, right? What is the method he is going to use? And what does he say about the effect that will have on the dog, right? The way that shooting him will affect him. 3, why does Candy tell George that he ought to have shot that dog himself? He ought to have shot that dog myself. 4, why does George shoot Lenny? And this relates to what happened with the dog, right? Like, why does he choose to do this? And obviously there's a number of reasons why he makes this choice. But one of them should relate back to the sense of responsibility. 5, how does George shoot Lenny? Obviously you should see a connection between the dog and Lenny here. And then the last question, how does Steinbeck use foreshadowing to suggest how Lenny will die? Be specific. And again, you're just kind of taking the information from the first several questions, compiling it into one final and complete answer. And that's the assignment. Email me if you have any questions. Take care, everybody.